Good evening and welcome to Dog Talk. I'm Dan Camilleri.
And I'm Laura McKillop. We'd like to start by thanking Enduro for their ongoing support in bringing you our live weekly Q&A.
Today, we're fortunate enough to be, as part of Anzac week, I suppose, and the long weekend, we're fortunate enough to be speaking with veteran Shayne Fowler from Canine Scent Training, and lucky enough for us, actually part of, or a very big part of Hooked on Hounds. So, go Shayne, how you going, mate?
I'm good, mate. Thank you.
How you feeling?
I'm really good, actually. Yeah.
Is that because you had a good dinner, or?
Yeah, dinner was actually amazing.
Yeah,
I loved it.
Thank the boss for that, mate. Just make sure it doesn't take it out of your pay.
Yeah.
Mate, thanks for jumping on, having a chat with us tonight, especially, obviously people are going to listen back to this pre-recorded for Anzac Day. Mate, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and then we'll get into a bit of, your story.
Yeah. So I was born in Lithgow over in the Blue Mountains. I spent all my childhood there pretty much up until 2000 when my mother remarried. I moved to Sydney and then spent probably about 7 years in Sydney, just out in the western suburbs, and left high school at the end of year 11 and pretty much did nothing for about 12 months. And my mum said I had to do something with my life. So I looked at being a personal trainer and also joining the military, and the military got back to me. 16 years later, here I am.
Got the beef for a personal trainer. come out around the corner some days, and I'm like, I'm just gonna back the other way. Shayne's the guns out.
No one's.
Mate, so Army, what was your scope? What, you just want to get a job, get out?
Yeah, so I initially, after it was a pretty big push from my mum to get out and do something, because I was actually really terrible in high school. Like, I was a pretty bad student, and then after I left school, she was like, "You really need to do something with your life." So I looked into that. The idea of it, I really liked all through high school anyway, but I never really considered it until that stage. Then when I applied, I actually wanted to join infantryman, but after I did all my like aptitude testing and stuff like that, they recommended I go into engineers, so the Royal Australian Corps of Engineers. So I did that. And
so, for someone knows how to step up, they went, "Oh, geez, you're actually academic."
I don't even know what an infantry is, whatever the word is.
I don't want to insult any of my infantry friends, but it's definitely a step up from infantry.
Yeah.
It's just a different role. They had different scope of jobs. Infantry, essentially the spine of your defence force. They're all your foot soldiers and stuff. Yeah. They take care of all the sniper teams, like mortars, recon teams, stuff like that. So they belong to Royal Australian regiments, and engineers are just essentially like jack of all trades in the army. So they do a lot of construction, demolitions, high research. They do a lot of like real niche things like water purification. Like if there's a tsunami, like they had a couple of years ago, back in 2009, up in Southeast Asia, they sent some engineers over there to do water purification and stuff like that. So they're kind of like a jack of all trades. All the dog handlers and EOD come under engineers, and a lot of the tradies too, like Sparkies and Chippies and stuff like that.
So when you got that advice you should go down that path, you think, "Oh shit, I should have tried a bit harder at school"? Or?
I was actually surprised because I didn't think they asked me to do that with how little I tried. But no, I think it's more mechanically minded sort of like scope on the aptitude testing. So if you do well in the mechanical sort of movements and stuff on the aptitude tests, they push you down that path a little bit. But so I did my 2007 was when I enlisted. So I did all my aptitude testing, all your fitness testing, stuff like that in Parramatta. I actually got not recommended by the psych to join the military when I first tried. She said I needed to wait 6 months and mature a bit, but the actual defense member who was my recruiter waved that. She doesn't know. Like she actually said to me, "You remind me of my brother, and he did really well in the military." So she pushed me through.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
hopefully it was a good thing. Yeah,
it was the blue eyes, mate.
Yeah, there's ocean blue eyes.
What originally attracted you to the military? Because of PT and military are very different.
Yeah, it's going to sound weird because I was such a bad kid in high school. I didn't really like authority, but I don't know. It was just something about the whole structure of it. even though it was like, it's really heavy on, discipline and stuff like that. I think it was more the scope of the work, like being able to go places and do some cool stuff. I think the reason I didn't really apply myself in school is because none of it really interested me. The only thing that really did interest me, believe it or not, was PE and then some biology actually. But I think it was more just the opportunity, because there's so many different things you can do and so many different paths you can take. So just that whole like plethora of options really appealed to me.
Looks pretty simple to me. Like on the left hand, can go to army and get fit, or you could go to jail and get fit.
Yeah.
So the army's probably the better go, right?
Yeah, I do come from Lithgow, so those are my two options.
We won't hold that against you, mate. Yeah, actually, visited home a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Had your first yard trial.
Yeah, I beat the boss in the encourage.
The female boss.
Yeah, the female boss. Yeah, no, that was my very first yard trial. That was actually really cool. I hadn't seen, believe it or not, even living in the country or been to any yard trials as a kid or anything. So that was my very first experience, and it was wicked. Yeah,
that's cool.
I loved it. Yeah,
that's cool. We might touch on a bit of your stock stuff a bit later.
Yeah,
we'll get in there. And so you've joined the army. Talk us through what's happened, mate. Where have you gone from there?
So after my recruit training and then my initial employment training, I posted to Darwin up at the 1st Combat Engineer Regiment up there in 2007, and spent a couple of years up there. I had my like when I got up there. So every Combat Engineer Regiment has a dog section attached to it. So they've got EDD teams or explosive detection dog teams that are attached as part of that unit, and they work with all the troops and the engineers there throughout all their training exercises and stuff. So as soon as I got up there, I noticed they were there, and I was like harassing them every week. Like I think it took me 4 years from when I got there to actually get on a OJTs, on the job training, which you have to do. You have to get recommended through them to be able to go do the course back here in Sydney. So it took me 4 years of harassing them, like weekends off. I'd be like, "Do you need help?" Like I'll come down. When there wasn't much on at work, I'd go down. I was like just so annoying that I think they were just like, fine, whatever, like give them a run.
So had you seen them in action, or
no, up until that point, only in training, like in and around work. The first time I saw them like actually working for real was 2010, end of 2010. My first deployment to Afghanistan. We had 4 dog teams attached to us. So the contingent that went over, we had 4 dog teams there, and we have one with us at all times. So I was lucky enough to have a dude named Nathan Cooper for most of my time there, who was a dog handler at the time. He's a really good dude, still trains dogs to this day, does a lot of detection stuff up in Darwin. And I got to work with him and his Kelpie actually as part of our search team for a bit. I actually got to work with all of them there, but he was the one I spent the most time with and learned a lot from. And the first dog I actually got to work, like he let me muck around with his dog, much like you do with your dogs. He let me work his dog onto a hide, and that was it. I was loving it. I was like, this is exactly what I want to do.
So onto a hide, what's
so a hide?
It's not like a cattle hide or
no. Like so a hide, with any of the explosive stuff, we call it a hide, where we put our target odor, like our training odor, depending what it is, we'll go set it up and then just create a search for the dog. So this one was an area search. So we just put, can't remember what the odor was, and it was an actual explosive odor. Put it out, came back a couple of hours later and just worked the dog through an area onto the odor. Just use it as continuation training. Though, like overseas, it's a bit harder to get the training in. They're doing a lot of operational stuff, but if they don't get any fines, we still want to, fines being like a operational like find. We still got to maintain some of these odors and the behaviors. So we just put stuff out for them to find.
Yeah. Give them a win.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you mentioned Nathan's dog was a Kelpie.
Yeah.
So what was the mix up or do you remember what the mix up was?
Yeah. So most of them, we had 2 Labradors, one was a Kelpie, and we had a dog named Scuba, who was like some Ridgeback random Great Dane sort of mix. He was this big red dog. Definitely not the type of dog we'd normally look at. But back then we had a lot of bitses anyway, a lot of different dogs. The recruitment and the recruitment for the stream back then, like the explosive detection dog stream, wasn't as well funded as it is today. They were getting a lot of dogs just from pounds or homes. They'd go to a pound and bounce a ball. Any dog that chased it, they'd bring him in and give him a run and trial them. it's a lot better now, but they had a lot of good dogs come out of pounds that were just mixes like Staffy crosses and sometimes like a Ridgeback cross sort of thing.
Being dog races, that Kelpie must have been tired getting all the work. Right? Let's take the Kelpie again.
She was good. Yeah, you'd have loved her. She was like all black, big pointy ears. Yeah, no, she was great. Nice small dog too, because we got to carry him. Like part of the training is you got to be able to like carry him around and do stuff with him. So you don't want a big heavy dog you have to carry around.
Yeah.
So you're enlisted for 4 years up to that point.
Yeah. So
and then you go, I've got the bug now. I want to do this.
Yeah.
How's that happen?
So after that, my OJTs was on that deployment. So that deployment came up around the 4-year mark after I'd gotten to Darwin. And I was just so annoying that they were like, fine, you can come help us out while we're overseas. So when I wasn't doing my search team stuff or out doing my normal role, when everyone else was like having a day off, I'd be down at the kennels, like picking up dog shit and cleaning kennels and just like trying to learn from them. But I didn't mind. It was good. Like that was probably one of the best parts of that whole deployment was getting that experience. And it was unlike anyone else's OJTs because normally they're all back in Australia and you don't get that that exposure, I guess, that the dogs get over there, and that the training is very different over there anyway. But yeah, so I'd done my OJTs on that deployment in 2010. It went from 2010 into 2011. That was a 9-month deployment. Came back, spent the rest of the year in the unit back at the dog kennel. So I continued OJTs there. And then in 2012, posted to Sydney to start my basic dog handlers course. Back then it went for a year. So it was a year of long-term schooling. Course was about 6 months and spent the rest of the year just doing like other training. But I was posting back to Darwin after that, and Darwin was due to deploy again to Afghanistan in 2013. So the second half of that year, we basically just finished a basic dog handler course, which is essentially an air scenting dog by the end of that course. And then at the end of that, we had 6 months because we were on the hook to deploy again to get those dogs into buried hide, like searching, which is another beast all on its own. It's very different to air scenting. It's like it can be quite difficult, but myself and the other handler that were going back, Rob, were keyholed to go on that deployment with our sergeant. So we spent a lot of time just training that for the next half of the year, basically on our own, because the staff were busy doing other stuff because they weren't there to, it wasn't sort of set up to be able to train buried hides at the school. They certainly didn't have the facilities or the staff. So we kind of just...
And it's not like kicking a hole in with your boot.
No, it's definitely not. Yeah.
A mine on the floor and kicking dust over it, right?
No, there's a lot that goes into it. Like a lot of the issues you get with like buried hide training and stuff like that is a lot of the disturbance that you leave after digging a hole in the ground or placing something in the ground. We don't want to use that as a way to cue the dogs that there's something there to investigate. We want them purely working for the odor that they're looking for.
So not looking for the dirt just kicked up.
Yeah, not looking for any disturbance in the ground. They're looking for the odor. Yeah, because while operationally there can be some stuff that might cue them onto a hide if there's disturbance, we really want to make sure that they're working to an odor and not being cued by anything. So a lot of the hides we can have down for like half a year. We'll bury them, like grid them and stuff like that, and search the dogs on them months later, up to about 6+ months.
So you're forgetting them and go, oh, thanks, dog. I forgot where I put that one.
Legitimately, the dogs have saved our asses a couple of times. We're like, I swear it was here, and the dog's like 6 meters that way. You're like, oh. But there's always that one dog in the team. Like if someone like puts an odor out and they forget where it was, they just get that one dog out to go find it, so you can recover all your explosives.
The old reliable one.
Yeah, old reliable. Yeah.
So, had you had any experience with dogs before then?
Nothing substantial. I think the closest thing I had to a dog growing up was a goat.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I had a pet goat for a couple of years out in Rydal, where I spent a couple of years growing up in Rydal. I had a goat. We did have a couple of dogs. Like my mum had a Roddy when we moved to Sydney. After we moved to Sydney, but nothing. Yeah. Nothing substantial. Yeah. Mostly it was like cats. My sister had a couple of horses out at Rydal and stuff. But yeah.
Yeah.
So when you start doing this course and you start playing with different dogs, are you playing with different dogs? Are you allocated a dog?
You get allocated a dog, but there's plenty of them there. Like you'll get allocated a dog that you'll go through the course with, and you have to pass the course with that dog. So you and the dog are both being assessed. So if I miss something and it's like a safety breach or something like that, but the dog still finds the hide, it's still a fail for the team and vice versa. So you both have to be doing your jobs. Yeah, but you get allocated the individual dog. You work with that dog throughout the course. You pass with that dog, and then you take that dog with you to your unit. So you stay together. Yeah. You will randomly, like if you're at a unit, you might have like 6 or 7 handlers there, and some are away. You might work their dogs just to keep them like maintained on odors and some other skill sets. But operationally, you only get qualified or certified with your dog, unless it's like really dire circumstances where you just have to grab a dog to use it. But for operational purposes, you get assigned a dog and you qualify with that dog to be able to deploy and work with it.
So did you have the one dog the whole time?
Yes. So I had a Labrador named Bruce. He was a black Labrador. He was a big fella, and he was an absolute pain in the ass. He was, I like constantly losing my voice, yelling at him. He just completely paid me off for like the first 5 months of that course. And then he finally come good, like the week before our assessments, on our route search assessment, like 2 weeks in, got bitten by a brown snake and died. Out on the range, So he got hammered by the biggest brown snake I've ever seen. He ran off into the bush, and I thought he was like looking for water because I could hear this, what I thought was splashing. And I waited, and I was like, nah, all right, I'm going to go get him. Walked in, and he's got this brown snake in his mouth, and it's just flapping around, striking him, and he's just sitting there, like dumb Labrador, like happy as Larry. Just tail wagging. Yeah, he's like, look what I found. And I was just like, oh my God. And then he let it go and it slithered off, and I put him back out on the road. And I was like freaking out. I was like sitting there, I was like, what the fuck do I do? And I looked to my instructor, and he's like, did you get hit? And I was like, I think so. Like, I'm pretty sure I saw it. Like, I was like, I'm like adrenaline going. I was like, I can't remember. I was like, I'm pretty sure. And he's like, well, just see what happens. And he's like, got me to cast the dog on. I got him to get on. And he walked on 3 steps, and his back legs gave out, and then he collapsed. And I was like, so grabbed him, threw him in the ute. And I don't think like the speed limit on the range is 40 k's an hour. It's all dirt roads. I think we were like 130 like the whole way. And then there's a bit of a debacle there. The vet that the school would use was in Liverpool. So we drove there, got there, walked in the back door, and they're like, we don't have any Envenine. And we're like, shit. All right. So then we're like, what's the next closest hospital? And they were like, our duty person was like, go to ARH in Homebush. And we're like, it was like 4:00 in the afternoon on the M5, bumper to bumper. We got there, and we're like, we're not going to make it to Homebush anytime soon. Like, it was a car park. So I knew there was a vet down in Ingleburn, and I was like, fuck it, we'll just go to Ingleburn. So we just illegal U-turn up over the M5, sped all the way back to Ingleburn. But Tom, from when he got bitten to when we got to the vet was an hour, and he was still alive, but he lost like control of his like bowels and all that sort of stuff, and he wasn't walking. Got him to the vet. They tried to give him, I think it was like 4 different shots of adrenaline. So they gave him IV. They gave him one, I think it was 3. So IV, and that didn't work. So they gave him one straight in the stomach. That didn't work. And they just one straight in the heart, and then he died. And I was just like, fuck.
Wow.
That was my first working dog in the military, and I was shattered because he'd just come good for me too. And I was like struggled so hard with him. And then I thought I was going to get in trouble because like I'd killed a dog. And then we went back. The course manager was like, he was pretty good about it. Like, I didn't get in any trouble. They were like, look, shit happens. It actually, if anything, they got a bit of an ass kicking for their procedures, like having an emergency vet that didn't have Envenine or wasn't a 24-hour operation thing. So they changed all that after that. And then I got given the best dog I've ever had. He was an English Springer Spaniel named Joe, and he had just come back. One of the instructors, actually the instructor I was with on that day, used to be his handler. So he was predominantly spent a lot of his time with the special forces groups in Afghan. So he'd done like 4 or 5 deployments, this dog, before, between 2 different handlers. He just kept going back and back, and he was a weapon. Typical Springer, like he was just like 100% or nothing. And he was so different to the dog I had that like I think I had 2 or 3 weeks to get him up to scratch to train with him before I had to do my assessment.
And build a rapport.
Yeah, build a rapport. So I had like 5 months with this other dog, and I got like 3 weeks with this completely different dog that was just like balls to the wall, like 100% in anything he did. But he was actually such a good dog. Like, he'd be sprinting down the road, and all of a sudden he'd just put on the anchors, and there'd be like this 4 or 5 meter long skid mark where he'd catch odor and then just work back into it. And you're like, how does he, like, no way he's catching this. And he'd do it every time. He was a wicked dog. His name was Joe. And that's where I got my love for Springer Spaniels from. That's why I have one at home now.
Good old Tonk.
Yeah, and I've had a couple of Springers actually throughout my career. I've trained a couple, and I've had to handle a couple too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but that was my first 12 months as a dog handler.
What a great dog though to learn from as well.
Yeah, no, it was I learned a lot from both of them because they're both very hard dogs to work, just for different reasons.
Well, one had a lot of brains. One
was hard to motivate, and the other one was like hard to slow down, right? Yeah. But I learned so much about like 2 different types of dogs from both of them. Like you learn a lot more from the dogs that are harder to train than the ones that are easy. And yeah, it was a bit of a roller coaster for 12 months. Even like I had Joe for years. Actually, my first deployment as a dog handler, I took Joe with me back to Afghanistan. So that was like his 5th or 6th time over there. Like he'd done some time over there. Yeah, so that was great. And there was a lot of people that were over there that like knew him. Like you'd be walking around and like dudes from like, because I wasn't in special forces at that point, and there'd be dudes walking around the camp. They're like, "Is that Joe?" And you're like, "Yeah." They're like, "Holy shit!" Like they know that dog. Like they're like another part of their family. And he's like my dog, and I'm like,
"Yeah,
get away."
So what did an average day look like for yourself and Joe when you're over in Afghanistan?
Well, there was no real average day. Like if you'd have forecasted when majority of the time you'd have like forecasts when you're doing patrols or if you're doing like operations or stuff like that. So if you weren't, it was a day off. It was kind of like, pick your own adventure. There's not a whole lot to do out there, so to be a lot of gym, and then some training.
So everything we've seen on Forrest Gump, right?
Yeah. We did have a table tennis table in our patrol base in Afghanistan. Nearly every one of them had a table tennis table. You get really good at table tennis. There's a lot of like camp maintenance stuff that had to be done, and like you're always prepping stuff, and you always had to do pickets and stuff like that. You'd be doing like shit like cleaning a lot of stuff because like you don't have cleaners. You might be lucky enough to have a cook. Otherwise, it'd be like you prep your own lunches and breakfasts and stuff. But a lot of it was like if you didn't need to be doing anything, don't be doing anything. But with a dog, but like once you got a dog, it's like you're always like in before other people, and the first one in, last one out, because you got to sort all your dog kennels out, like clean them, get your dog sorted before you can do anything else for the day, and then you got to organize your training. There was a period where it was like hard to get time to do training for your dogs because like
that was going to be my next question.
Yeah, well, they look at you like you're another body, and it's like if you've got like another entity that you're responsible for, and like if it's not working, who's going to be the first person they're going to blame? Like if you're training, if your dog misses a hide or something like that, or misses an IED, and someone goes up, like you're like, well, look at my training notes. Like, when did I get to train this thing? It's not a robot. Like, you can't just turn it on and it works optimally every time.
So did you have to record every time you trained the dog on paper as well?
So you'd record the type of training you did. You'd record like how long you trained for, the odors that you hit, or whether they missed the odors, or whether they, if they struggled. You'd record as much detail as you could, not to save your ass, even though it did sometimes, but more just for yourself too, because like you want to, like, if my dog hits a certain odor, I want to track that down so that I know I need to work on that again.
Yeah.
Because like especially if it's a theatre specific odor, like something that they use a lot in that theatre, you don't want your dog missing it. You know what I mean? So you want to make sure your dog's running hot on all the odors that are going to be potential threats.
Common things.
Yeah. And you just track it so that if your dog does miss something one day and someone goes like, "Why'd your dog miss that?" You can be like, well, firstly, it's a dog. It's not it's not perfect. Here's my training notes. It's hit it like 6 times in the last 4 days. Like, what do you want? And like, there's a lot, especially when you're talking like subsurface hides. It's a different beast, like I said, to air scenting stuff. There's a lot of factors. Even with air scenting, there's a lot of factors that come in. But with the subsurface, it's a lot harder because like you're waiting for all these odors to come out of the ground, and you don't know what the soil content's like, what the moisture content's like if it's rained recently, like what the vapor pressure is of the odor that's actually under there anyway. So there's some interesting stuff. Like we had a training ground for buried hides. Like I was saying, we'd leave them down, and they were all different sorts of surfaces and stuff like that. And there were some that we'd leave down for ages, and they'd be big hides, like nearly a kilo worth of explosives, and the dogs just wouldn't hit them ever. Like no dog, even Old Faithful, you'd send them out, they just like couldn't get anything out of it because the soil. I think one of the ones was like
just encased it.
Yeah, and it just held onto I'm assuming it just held onto those like particles that the dog would hit on.
And it's safe.
Yeah, it was fascinating. The hardest one to hit on was like mulch. Like we had this whole mine lane of mulch, and we had like 4 or 5 hides out in it, and we couldn't get many dogs to hit on it.
There'll be a lot of other odors coming out of that as well, right? And
well, yeah, but they're all the same.
Heats up in the inside as well.
I was going to say weeds can't go through mulch normally.
So yeah, that was the hardest one. We'd have like nearly hard as concrete, like dirt, and the dogs would still get stuff out of that. And then the mulch one was just like phenomenal.
Yeah, wow.
So there's something to be careful because that can be combustible inside as well. Like you go to green waste, like tips and whatnot, they're always turning it over because if they don't turn it over, it actually goes up.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Actually,
I had never experienced that, but
I've seen that a few times in the Earth Movie game. Actually, you mentioned the kennels a couple of times, like when you were deployed. What were the kind of kennel setups?
Yeah, so they vary. Like in the main bases, they could be quite nice. They were always just built like when we got there. They were never anything special, at least not at ours. Like we'd have the tradies and stuff build us like their own little yard.
Yeah.
The one at Tarankout, the main base in Afghan, was pretty good. We had someone, I don't know how they managed to do it, but they managed to convince someone to put a pool, like a full above ground pool in the kennels for hydrotherapy for the dogs. So that was wicked.
Off ground kennels with dogs on the deck? Or?
Those ones were actually like built, like cinder block built, like plastered. They were like an old refurbished building. So like the kennel was actually like an old room. It had like metal door, and they just built some fences off that door and made like a day run.
Right, yeah.
But like it depends where you were. Like, there were some places where it was like you find a bit of Hesco, which is like the main thing they use for fortification in walls.
Yeah.
It was like this weird mesh thing with a fabric that you'd fill with soil, so it had really good like when you shot it with rounds, like it wouldn't penetrate very far, and it was really easy, like rapid to put up. Yeah, it was rapid to deploy, and it was like good protection. So they put those around, and you just use those and make a makeshift kennel, find some like cyclone fence somewhere, like any wood you could scrounge. One of the ones in TK on my second trip was we had no grass, so the dogs were just literally their day run was like big rocks, like big pebbles. That's all we could get because they were like, limited for space, right? And you needed to make it secure because we weren't the only people on that base. So yeah, you just do what you could. There were some that were really nice and some that were literally like some days if you're out on patrol like on a vehicle, you wouldn't even have a kennel. You just sleep with your dog in your swag.
Yeah,
and they'd just sit in the car during the day if it wasn't working. Yeah. That was a lot better because everyone got to pat them and they were involved.
And with the other soldiers, like, do I call them soldiers?
Yeah.
Were they like welcoming and interactive to the dogs?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, like they're like an asset, right? So like we don't want to treat them like they're a pet or a mascot, but at the same time,
they're loved.
Like the handler, me as a handler, I never stopped anyone patting my dog as long as they asked. If he wasn't working, if he was working, I didn't want anyone interacting with him because I didn't want him to lose focus. And he never did. Like he was like Tonka. You see him like you walk up and say hello, and he just goes. Like, he doesn't care about people. But like if they're working, we don't want them distracted. But when they're not working, like I'd let anyone pat him because like I know, especially overseas, it's like people are just missing a bit of home.
Yeah.
So if they see a dog, they can't really help themselves, and you're like, fuck it, like let them pat the dog. Like it'll make their day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my dog's social and like give him something to do. So
it
was funny. We used to take him into the gym because like we were limited for space and like you want to run them out on the hard ground, like because their paws would get like pretty ripped up when they're working out there. We used to have to take care of their paws a fair bit. So to exercise them, we'd put them in the gym on the treadmills and just like tie them up on the treadmill nice and slow. And people just walk past taking photos and like we're just sitting there like the dog's running. I'm just sitting there like and run next to them and stuff. But one of them I had two dogs on treadmills either side of me and I was running in the middle because my mate was on his leave period. But it just like you got to let people like interact with them. It's good for them and it's good for the people too, as long as it's not interfering with their work.
How were you treating their paws? Like over there, I'm assuming it's pretty limited sometimes.
Yeah, like we try and do a lot of like preemptive stuff, like toughening them up before leaving. Like as long as they get really dry and like large cracks, and we have the booties, like we'd use the booties if they were getting really bad, but it was just a matter of making sure they weren't too dry, but make sure they weren't so soft that they tear up because the ground over there is pretty harsh. It's just pretty much rocks and dirt, and then if you're in the green zone, you're still walking on dirt and rocks. So it's just a really dry, arid place over there at least.
And these dogs, they're working their guts out. They're finding your target odors. What I'm assuming you're not walking around with 14 kilos of chicken in your pocket or sausages.
So
sausage every time they do something good.
All of the dogs we purposely select because they've got a high play drive for a toy of some sort, and most of the time it's been a tennis ball or a ball, and that's the number one criteria for us in all of the dogs that they would recruit. I say us, but them that they would recruit because like we can use that to
16
motivate
years,
them.
mate. You can say us.
We can use that to motivate them to work for hours on end in really shitty conditions in really shitty places, doing a really shitty job. Like their job, they're doing a really good job, but it's hard work. You know what I mean? Like they could be working for ages. And they do it all for a tennis ball. Just
crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. So I remember some of my other dog trainer friends have seen some of my dogs and they're like, oh my God, your dog's a neurotic. And we're like, yeah, that's how we need them to be. Like they're not going to work and do what we ask them to do if they're not that driven for something. If they're, if they could have a day where they're like, I could care less. It's like, that's not the dog for us.
Well, they're not gonna.
Because we can't afford to have a dog that's like, I don't want to work today,
Correct.
unless it's like, injured or sick. If it's just doesn't want to do it, it's not going to make the cut because we need it to work every time we need it to work, right?
So do you have like spare dogs as well? Like if your dog did get injured, like if you went over with, I think there were 3 of us you mentioned in your.
So that second deployment, I think this will answer your question. There was 3 of us penned to go over, and then they cut numbers, and I got removed. But then a month after they got into country, one of the dogs wasn't meeting its standards. So you give them a month to acclimatise and do all their training and hit all the odors that are in theatre, and then they get assessed, just like we were talking about here in Australia.
So in theatre, like where you deployed?
Overseas, where you're deployed. So one of the dogs over there wasn't passing. So then they called back to Australia and told me that I was heading over. So I headed over a month after them. Got over there and did my acclimatization with my dog, and then did my assessment, and then we were off to go. So there was just two diggers running the show because it was our sergeant's dog that didn't certify.
Yep.
So then he stuck around for a little bit and then flew back home, and it was just me and my mate Rob.
Just 2 dogs, 2 blokes.
Yeah, 2 diggers like in charge of it. So Rob actually did really well because he was there for the month beforehand. I think he got accommodation for that trip for his work because he stepped up and did the sergeant's role for that month while I was doing all my acclimatization and night training for the dog. That deployment I think lasted like 5 or 6 months. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. But that was an interesting one.
Yeah.
There's a lot less going on like in that deployment because that was like one of the I think that was the last deployment that they deployed a dog on because Australia was pulling out of Afghan shortly after that. So I think me and Rob were outside of SAT, the Special Forces, were the last 2 regular Army dog handlers there. I think ever. Like
right
up until that point, for at least for Operation Slipper, which was the operation name for that period. Yeah.
So then you come back with your dog.
Yeah,
and it's not enough to be away. So that's what happened. Then you come back, do some more training. What happens there?
Yeah, so we came back, have like a bit of time off. So after that trip, I got back in towards the end of 2013. Did another year up in Darwin, and then I applied to join a unit in Sydney called the Special Operations Engineer Regiment, which is basically just the Special Forces version of the Royal Australian Engineers. So it's all engineers that go through a selection process and like a reinforcement cycle to support the other Special Forces units within Australia. So I applied for that in 2014, did a year of training, and passed all the pre-training. You got to do like a couple of fitness exams and some aptitude testing as well, and some more psych exams. And then that just gets you down to Sydney to do your selection and your reinforcement cycle, where you do a year worth of extra training. They cover like all your weapons, all your insertion, like parachuting and like fast roping, abseiling, all that sort of stuff.
So that's 2 years before you even get out on the job.
Yeah, that's just you do. Like if you include a bit of training at the start, so it's like maybe a year and a half because you got to like it's the fitness test for that is it was pretty hard. They still have it around now, but you've got to prepare for that just to get like deemed suitable to be able to go down and then start a year worth of training where you constantly, it's like a year of just assessment. You just roll from one course to the next, and if you miss one of them, unless it's something that you can like quickly pick up, you got to wait like a whole nother year and start for the whole process.
It's always so analytical.
Yeah.
On the computer out there for a couple of hours today, so you get your training forms.
That's just my OCD, mate.
I love it, mate. That's what I get on.
It served me well though. But yeah, and that's like I enjoyed that. That was a hard year though. Like you're doing a lot of courses, a lot of time away from work. It's a lot of hours, and a lot of potential for injuries and stuff. Like there's, especially on like some of the insertion methods when you do your parachuting, because it's all static line, where your chute opens as you jump out of the plane. You don't open it yourself, and they're designed to let you fall a bit quicker so you don't get shot out of the sky. You hit the ground pretty hard, and there's a lot of like broken legs and like shattered bones from people that do they got like a little catchphrase where it's just accept the best possible landing.
Wow.
So if shit's gone bad, they're like accept the best possible landing, and you're like, what does that mean? Like,
look for the softest tree.
Yeah. But yeah, a couple of people get like normally there's always a couple of broken legs or some injuries that come out of that, which is why they push it right towards the end. So if someone does get injured, they've got a heap of time to recover.
Yeah.
And then end of the next year, hopefully attempt it again and not get broken.
So what's Joey doing in this?
Joe, he would like essentially while I'm doing all that, this is what I was talking about before, where like the handlers are always doing extra work. So when we post to that unit, you're not posting there as a dog handler, you're posting there as a special forces engineer who just happens to be a dog handler. So you do all of the training that all the other engineers do, and then you've got to go take care of your dog or come in and sort your dog out in the morning, do all the training, and then take care of your dog in the afternoon, maintain the training of that dog in your own hours.
Joey got a bit of a holiday from all these trips, right?
Well, yeah. But it was good. It was hard just because you're doing so many hours. Like you spend all day training on something you've got no idea about, and then you've got to go back and like work a dog, take care of it, maintain its skills. Because once that training finishes at the end of the year, you've then got like a couple of weeks. I think it's like 6 weeks to do your reteam training or your training with that dog before you get certified. So back to be like a qualified to work that dog operationally. So he spends like a year getting some training, and then I've got 6 weeks to try and recoup that and like get him back up to standard.
So you're saying you were doing, once you got put through your engineering thing, you were doing that as well as your dog handling in that role?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't pick up on that when you first started.
Yeah, so you do the whole year of training is to get you into a position like qualified where you can do the role of a special operations engineer, which is like mobility support and stuff like that. And then you're also a dog handler. Yeah, so you might have your dog attached to your hip searching for stuff, or you could be searching your dog, bring him back, and then go do something else.
Yeah, right.
So it's essentially just like another
two
feather in your hat. Yeah. Which became really important too, because a lot of the time when they're overseas, if they were doing stuff that had limited space for people, they'd take the people, like the most essential people, which would normally be an EOD operator who's like in charge of, if once you find an IED, they're the ones who dismantle it or destroy it or deal with it, right?
And that's what you were training for?
No. So that's
what I was finding.
So
that's what you were finding.
So IEDs is what we would be finding, or caches and stuff. So like improvised explosive devices.
Sorry, I'm not.
That's all right. So we'd be, our role as a searcher or a high risk searcher, as an engineer or a special operations engineer, is to provide mobility support. Yeah. So it's basically getting people from A to B.
Convoys
without any casualties, hopefully, through like explosions or anything like that, explosives or IEDs. So we'd be doing a lot of searching with metal detectors and stuff like that, or just using your eyes. Your eyes were the number one tool for a lot of it, and a lot of people think it might be the metal detector, but it's like you're looking for patterns or lack of patterns, or they say the presence of the abnormal, the absence of the normal is what you'd be looking for. If you were channeled in a certain way, which a lot of people wouldn't realize, or stuff like that. So you're constantly and the problem with that is like you're so focused on looking at all these different things for like this invisible threat. You're not looking for, your eyes are down on the ground, right? You're not up looking about. So we need people to provide us security while we're searching, you know what I mean? Because I can't be looking up here for people potentially trying to shoot me or stuff like that while my eyes are on the ground looking for things that might blow me up.
How many hours a day? Something like that be?
Again, it depends. Like depends on the operations and what you got going on. Could only be a couple of hours. I think the biggest day I remember having was on my first trip as a searcher, not as a dog handler. We had to go somewhere to try and catch someone who might have been in this building. And we left really, it was like 2 or 3 in the morning. It was like pitch black. So we patrolled under night vision goggles. I think it was like a 30K patrol through like rivers. Like by the time we got there, it was freezing, like up to your waist down was just wet. And we got to the compound that we needed to wait for. We're waiting for sunrise, and sunrise was like 3 hours away. So we basically just slept in the fields, like in a picket. So you'd have like a cordon around this compound. It was a pretty big cordon. But I remember I was with two other engineers that I was with. So 2 of us would be laying in this dirt field asleep, with the one in the middle awake. So he was the warmest. Yeah. And then when it was his turn to sleep, he'd move, and the next person to roll in and then sit up. And we did that for like a couple of hours till sunrise, and we hit the building. The dude was there. It was all fine. And then patrolled back 30 Ks and then back into the compound. Sent him off, and they released him later that day.
And the reason I ask is like things that like you're searching, right? And, oh yeah, wow. Yeah. And like using your eyes like a lot. Like Man, some people can't even sit behind a computer for 5-6 hours a
It's-
day, right?
yeah.
And you're there just
Yeah.
searching, using your eyes.
Well, that's the
And
thing,
your
like,
brain, like
You're
eyes
burning
and-
your
yeah.
mental
You-
stimulation, right? Like how
Mm.
tired are you getting?
It
Right?
mentally fatigues you, but you're also carrying all the same weight as everyone else. You got your body armor, all your weapons, all your water, backpack. Like we'd be carrying water for the dogs if you're doing stuff with them.
Yeah.
So I think back
So-
then,
I'm just looking at the picture here, and all the gear on you.
well, that's light. That's
Yeah.
I don't even have a
That'd be
backpack
nothing.
on there.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
That's probably going to play one of those table tennis tournaments.
So like, to put it into perspective, back then I was about 80 kilos, like just clean
Yep.
skin. And I remember weighing myself one day, like fully rigged up, and I was like nearly 120 kilos.
Wow.
Ooh.
Yeah, so you're carrying a lot of weight.
Yeah,
And like a lot of it you can't get rid of. Like you'll use your water and some of your food, but you can't just drop your rounds, or you can't just drop, your first aid kits
Yeah.
or anything. So you're carrying a lot of it with you. And yeah, but like you do get used to it, and you do a lot of training before you leave. But one of the biggest things about that place is the altitude. So they're like 3,000 meters above sea level. So you can do all the training you want in Australia. You get there and you're fucked just walking down the
Yeah,
street.
right.
yeah,
Like,
right.
it takes you. That's why you got so long to acclimatize when you get there, because like
And same with the
And the
dog.
dogs
yeah,
too, right?
the dogs
Yeah.
get a month before you even look at assessing them, because like it's just they're not going to work. They're not going to be
And if
effective.
the dog doesn't make the cut, handle her back with the dog.
They can do. It's kind of up to the people on the ground. So like for example, when I got brought over, the person I was replacing could have taken my dog. Like he could have just said, "I'm taking that dog and I'll re-team with it," but he didn't, and just said like I'd been working with that dog for quite a while at that stage, like nearly a year, and did a lot of training with him, like I said, for that second half of that year in Berrieds, and he was like, I don't think I'd be able to work it effectively. Maybe towards the end of the trip, but it's not going to help him, after
Yeah.
6 weeks when he's got to be on point. So he was like, you bring the dog over, you work the
Yeah.
dog, and he'll leave. So
What about-
he stayed for my month of acclimatization to lay hides and assess, and then went home.
What about vice versa? What if the dog makes acclimatization but the soldier doesn't?
They'd probably, I don't think I've ever seen that, but they'd probably just send the team home, because you've always got like an op reserve team. Like
Yeah,
that's
okay.
the role I was filling at home. And
Yeah.
they've always got people, like even at the school, they've got dogs that are certified, that are fully qualified. In case something happens, they can supplement something in case a dog dies or the dog isn't making the cut or something like that. That rarely happens. They'll normally just replace a whole team, because like the re-team and the bond you build with the dog is quite important, especially when you're working. Like some of these dogs, they're all off leads. Everything they do, you'll be working like hundreds of meters away, and like you've got to just understand how your dog works and rely on it to be doing its job. So yeah, normally they'll just pick a team that has worked together and has a bond and that's certified, rather than trying to throw one together last minute. It has happened before, but I think it's like extremist.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about dogs working out like a couple 100 meters. So obviously a good recall on your dog, but like, we go to work stock, right? And we're like in the work stock community, not me, myself, not with my little hobby farm here, right? But like dog's got a good recall or stop. You could probably take it to work, having some sides on it. Yeah, probably, going to get a bit more done. And we'll touch on that a bit later with the stock dog stuff. What kind of control do you need on your dog to be able to take it out there to work?
So we need a recall. Like a recall is like our like most, I'd say, like crucial behavior, right? Because once our dog finds odor, like essentially if they find something and we're operational, our best bet is that they're essentially standing or sitting right over a live IED that could, depending how it's set to function, could go at any minute. And I need to be able to call my dog off that. But like the way we work with our dogs is they always get paid for odor. Like, just that way we know they're going to be obedient to it. Like if I'm trying
so everyone out there's like paid rewarded
for odor, yeah.
Yeah.
We always reward them for being on odor. So we want them to essentially, like if I'm, because I don't know where it is, right? If my dog's like in a scent cone and working, I don't pick up on that, and I'm trying to get him to go the opposite direction, I want him to ignore me, to be obedient to that odor. I want him to go in and find that if he thinks he's on. If it turns out he's not, then I want him to listen to me.
Intelligent disobedience.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And
so,
it's going to sound silly. They sit or something when they get
depends
the
on
odor.
we ask for a passive response, so it's either a sit or a down.
Yeah.
Passive response, so they're not moving, they're just sitting there staring.
Yeah.
We like them to get to as close as possible to the source or
Yeah.
the odor.
Don't want them barking because you don't want to be alerted.
We don't want them
Yeah.
barking.
Angler over here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're searching at night, and we don't want them active due to the nature of what they're looking for.
So active digging.
Yeah, digging or like running around, whatever. We just want them to get as close to the source
And
odor as
sit or
possible,
drop. Yeah.
and sit or drop and just stare at it.
Yeah.
Because like it's easy if you're on a road or a route, where your dog's just looking at a bit of ground, you can be like, oh, cool, it's there. But if you're like a warehouse and there's like a stack of shelves and your dog's sitting 5 meters back and not right close to it, you're like, oh, I've got to search this entire wall. But if they're like that on a box with their nose on the side of the box, you're like pretty certain it's that box, right? You start there and work out.
Yeah.
But we just get a passive response, and then we have to be able to call them off that, which can be hard to do it at first because they're like, no, I need to be here to get paid. I always get paid for being here or rewarded for being here. But initially, it's a bit of a struggle to get them off that. But like as soon as they break that passive behavior, like use markers and stuff, we can reward them and gradually build that into like a full recall and then reward them back here. But we used to always reward on source with our training. So that'd be the dog's on odor and we throw a ball in or drop the ball where the odor is because it's in training. It's not a live IED. And then more recently we've gone to like off source essentially. Yeah, that's what we call it anyway.
So throw the ball the other way.
Yeah, so I just mark the dog. He comes back to me and gets a reward at me because that's more realistic of what we're going to do in an operational environment, right? I'm not going to throw a ball 100 meters down the road onto an IED. I'm going to call him back and then reward him. And it's tricky in an operational environment because I don't know if my dog's on odor. Yeah, I got no idea, but I'm going to reward him anyway because I have, you would have faith in their training and believe in their training. And if it turns out that he wasn't, that's one withdrawal from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds or thousands of deposits
of repetitions,
of good repetitions. And then even if I didn't reward him then, and I was just like a bit of a pat, like, yeah, we'll move on. And it turns out there was something there. I just figure out what that odor was, like talk to someone, find out what it was, and then make sure I hit him on it later and reward him on it later, just so there's that deposit's back in the bank and I haven't taken a withdrawal away.
Ever find something like that you never come across often and then take that back and train on it later? Yeah,
they would do that a lot. Like a lot of the stuff that would be like homemade. So like in Australia, everything we train on is like a military grade explosive. So it's made like to specification on highest grade.
So clean.
Yeah, exactly. But everything over there, well, not everything, but a lot of the stuff over there is homemade. So it's dirty. And there's a couple of studies that I saw where, like, if you only ever train your dog on that cleanest one, the detection threshold for dirty variants of that is going to be really low. But if you broaden their horizon and reward them across the spectrum of clean or dirty, you've got a better chance of them indicating. Some dogs still will, depending on what their threshold is for that odor. But we always try to, when we can, train them on things that aren't like, made in a lab, that are homemade. So if we found stuff over there, and a lot of our training odors over there was a Connex just full of random shit like mines and RPGs and grenades that people had found that EOD had rendered safe for us to use, and we just go
hoping that they were.
We just go like lay some mines out and then search the dogs on them because that's the real thing. It's just it might be minus a firing pin or there's a safety on it or something. Because that's the closest we can get to what's going to be out there. And we can't get a lot of that here. Won't be allowed to use a lot of that here because there's a lot of work health and safety stuff here. It doesn't apply over there.
Yeah.
Your dog ever find anything that you never trained on or that you never expected?
There were, not mine, there were some dogs that had, it's actually a thing now, but there were some dogs that would like indicate on like mobile phones and ICOMs, which are like radios that were notorious for like, the people we were, working against over there using to communicate. And the dogs would just like pay a bit of interest. And like over there, like if our dog pays interest to something, 90% of the time you're going to go have a look at that. Like, this dog's not going to pay interest for nothing. Like you get to know the dog, and if your dog pays more than what you'd think is just like a glance or, a bit of curiosity, you'd be like, go fucking move that rock. Go have a look under that rock. Like, you'd go do it. Because that was still your job, right? Even as a dog handler, if my dog paid interest in something and there was no other engineers that could go excavate it, I'd have to go do that. As a dog handler, because you're still an engineer as your base trade. And like, you don't want to be that guy who's like, my dog sat on that. No, you go do it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you want to help out because like there's a lot of like it's hard work, and the boys are always like investigating shit. And as an engineer, like you were saying before, I think where we started was like it's mentally fatiguing, but physically fatiguing, like the work, because you're doing all the same kilometers as everyone else. Like if you start getting shot at, you still got to run and do everything and fight back. You just got a dog attached to your hip that you've got to recall while this is happening, and then clip it up and then move with this dog attached to your hip. So all of your movements and like how you're going to, get yourself to cover, you got to consider that. If your dog even comes back, there was one instance where they got into a contact and the dog ran off.
So you got a bit of live fire.
Yeah, they got live fired and the dog ran off. They found the dog 2 years later. Some US Army people went into this village and saw this dog.
Oh, wow.
There's a book about it. The handler was David Simpson. He was actually my chief trainer on my basic dog handler course. The dog, but yeah, so the dog ran off and they lost it, couldn't find it. And then 2 years later, some US guys were rolling through this village. They saw this dog and they're like, that doesn't look like a normal Afghan hound. They spoke to the people like, yeah, we found it. They took it back. Like they bought the dog off these villagers, took it back, and ended up reuniting it. And came flew all the way home, and he got the dog back. Yeah, and he kept it until it died.
Wow!
Wrote a book about it and everything.
That's a pretty cool story.
That is an amazing story.
Yeah, it was phenomenal. 2 years later,
that is so special.
They said it was in a good paddock too. Like when they found it, it was healthy. It was a Labrador, so it was eating everything.
Yeah,
yeah.
A lot of Afghani cuisine.
Yeah,
yeah.
It's a crazy story. Yeah,
and I think that's something like we talked about. You working your dog, looking for explosives as you're going, but I think people like listening back won't actually think like, wait a minute, you're actually getting shot at some of the times while this is happening, or the possibility of it happening. Like,
yeah, and like when I think about it, it's like a lot of people like would say to you like, oh, like we scared and stuff, and I was like, no, really, because like in my head when I think about it now, like it was just a big game of hide and seek to me. Like someone's trying to hide stuff, and I'm better at finding it than you are at hiding it. And that's how I looked at it, and like.
And they're trying to disturb you along the way.
Yeah, and like and
I'm over here. Look.
That's one of the things, right? Like, they would never like the people like we were working against there. Like, they're never going to pick a fight with like a formed military if it's not in their advantage, or if they're not trying to achieve something. They're not just going to roll out one day and be like, oh, look, there's some people there and start shooting. They'll be doing it for a reason. And a lot of the stuff, like in my brain as an engineer, I'm like, if I'm getting shot at, it's because they've decided to do it. Like it's optimal for them right now to engage us to make me do something. So like I was saying before, like if like one of our drills, like you get shot at, you're constantly, whenever you're moving, you're like looking for cover. So if a shot rings at any point, you're like, there's this wall over here, or there's this thing because you've just seen them. You're like, that'd be a good cover. That'd be good cover. That'd be shit cover. And you're identifying these things as you're moving through an area with everything else that's going on. And I'm like, in my brain, and they're really smart. Like they would watch us for years because we were there for years, and they understood how we operated and how we worked. I think there was one story where we brought out this new fancy bit of equipment that would sit in front of the cars. It was a mine roller, and we'd roll it out in front of the cars. So if there was any IEDs, that would hit it first. After the first day of using that, they just started pushing main charges a certain amount of meters back, which they measured from the front of that roller to being under the car. So you'd hit the switch, but the main charge is under your car now. And it took them one day. And they were like, there's nothing you can do that they won't. They're credit to them. They were really smart and like crafty with what they did. But back to my story was like, if they choose to engage us, noting we're like a trained, formed army with like heaps of people plus A&A, and they don't have they're like maybe 2 or 3 people just taking pot shots. They're doing it for a reason because it's optimal for them for what they want to achieve majority of the time. So they might be trying to push you into a certain area if they've put IEDs down or if they've got stuff in place, because all they have to do is ring out one shot and then everyone's going to sort of scatter and look for cover. And if you're doing that because the shoot threat is always precedent, like doesn't matter what's happening. If I'm getting shot at, I need to take care of that before I'm, dealing with an IED or a casualty. Even our casualties have to take care of themselves until the shoot threat's gone, because that's a bigger threat to everyone, including them. So you don't just stop shooting at someone to go do some first aid unless it's like giving someone a tourniquet. And in your brain, you're like, fuck, I know I need to take cover. I know I'm getting shot at, but where do I go? Because like they know what I'm going to try and do or where I might potentially go. And but like being an engineer, knowing that our job was to look for things, you're like, where do I go here? Like I don't want to get shot, but I also don't want to blow up. Like,
I don't want to run over that.
And there's a saying where it's like we take, like naturally as humans we're quite lazy. So like we had a thing where it was like if you're channeled or if there was the opportunity to, say for example, there's a rock wall and there's a break in the rock wall, or you could climb over the rock wall. Most people would normally walk through the break, but that's the lazy route, and that's the most likely route. So we avoid the most likely route and take the hardest route possible, an untargetable route is what we try to call it. And there's a story where we were patrolling and we had these out front. So not the Australian engineers, we were back a little bit, just searching stuff along the way. And we're patrolling through, they went through this rock wall, and the first lot of infantry guys got to the wall, and there was the team leader and an interpreter. And they got to this rock wall, and there was a break in the rock wall, and the interpreter went through the break, and the team leader went over the rock wall, and there was an IED in the break, and the interpreter got blown up and died. And the Australian team leader who went over the rock wall was only a couple of meters away, so he copped a lot of shrapnel, like tertiary shrapnel from rocks and stuff, and got injured and sent home. I think he lost his eye. But that's what we're talking about, where like you're channeled, but like if a shot rang out at that point, like even like most people would go, fuck, like take cover, and they might duck through that break in the wall because they're like, that's
Yeah,
protection, right?
Yeah.
But they do it for a reason because they're not going to just engage
Setting
you.
you up.
Yeah, exactly. So that was something like I'm talking about, like how mentally fatiguing a lot of it is, because you're worried about that shoot threat. You're worried about where you're walking. You're worried about if you've missed something. You're worried about like if you've got your dog. Like there's so many things that you're trying to keep track of. Plus you're in this like 40-degree heat or like minus temperatures, walking around, wet shoes, wet pants. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot that goes on.
Crook guts.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Not healthy all the time,
A
right?
lot of dudes walking around with one boot on
Boot at least.
Yeah.
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 This was a lunchtime conversation a couple of weeks
Sacrificial
ago.
undies, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever gone through so many pairs of undies in my life. But yeah, it sounds like a complaining, but I'm not. It's just part of the job and part of the complexity of it. But every job over there has its own complexities, right? Like it's not like any one job's
100%.
harder than the others.
And you're not complaining, you're just explaining exactly what was happening.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Like my focus is on the ground to make sure the dude next to me who doesn't get blown up, but his focus is out in front to make sure I don't get shot while I'm trying to protect. You know what I mean? It's this big organism that works together, and everyone's got a lot of responsibility. But that's
Especially
part of the
a
reason
dog.
why it works, right? Because like there's a thing called shared suffering. Like everyone, like who goes through shit times and stuff, they build these bonds. And some of the dudes I'd never met before that deployment, but after 9 months with them, or even some of them, because I moved around a fair bit on that deployment, I was actually really lucky. I did a lot of mounted stuff, a lot of dismounted stuff, and then I got to do like a joint sort of thing. But a lot of the dudes, like some of them I only worked with for 3 months, and that deployment was in 2010. I'm still good friends with them now.
Yeah.
And I only really ever spent 9 months with them, but it was like some pretty shit times or some really good times as well. But you just develop really good bonds with people in like when you're in situations like that, because you all go through the same shit.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you come home, you do your course. You're now special forces. You got Joey still.
So Joe actually retired when I finished my my year training. So he retired. He went back to one of his first handlers, who was a special forces handler as well, who had since gotten out. So
proper retirement for him then.
Yeah, proper retirement. He got a couple of good years left in him. He ended up getting cancer. A lot of the dogs end up like getting a good retirement and then just passing away peacefully. Like we've got a compulsory retirement age of 8 now. So we train the dogs anywhere from 12 to 18 months or 24 months. Any later than that, they try to avoid it because they retire them at 8. So they get like a 6-year operational lifespan of the dog from 2 years. If it's, brought in at 2 years, trained for a year, they get like 5 to 6 years and then retire them at 8, which is good. Like that's not relatively new, but there were some dogs when I joined that were like 12 or 13 because they didn't have the pool to recruit from to train newer dogs. They were getting dogs from the pound, and a lot of them, even now, we get a lot of dogs from like really reputable breeders that have big like organizations, and a lot of them don't make the cut.
Yeah.
So the pound dogs got us through a pretty rough period. Like majority of the Afghan conflict was dogs that had been recruited through that stage.
Yeah, well,
it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
All they got to do is chase a ball.
Yeah,
chase a ball.
That's simple.
But you did another tour as well, mate.
I did. So after getting through all that training, I spent a couple of years in that unit. Did some domestic counterterrorism stuff. I was lucky enough, actually, I don't know if I've mentioned this to you, to get a trip over to Hawaii. So the US
surfing, mate.
Yeah, the US law enforcement agencies do this thing called the NORT assessment, National Odor Recognition Testing. And it's basically they have to pass that to be able to use their dog's indications as evidence in a court of law. And the ATF run that assessment for them. And they do it in different places throughout America. And they held one in Hawaii, and we got an invite, and I was lucky enough to get my name on the list. So I went over to Hawaii with this dog, my Springer, who I got after Joe retired. I got another Springer.
Yeah, and who's that?
That's Loki.
Loki.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything like we're expecting from the Marvels series?
Yeah, he was like Joe, but like on steroids. He was like he was just like a ping pong ball in his brain. Like he was a very hard dog to train, but just like Joe, he gave 110% of anything he did. So you couldn't fault his effort.
Yeah.
It was just really hard to try and focus all that.
Sounds like a particular shepherd out there. Outside there.
It was just really hard. With that dog, we were talking about like if we've ever gotten to find things that weren't explosives on that deployment, that a specific type of switch, which is what, it's like what would function an IED, right? We call it a switch. It could be a pressure plate, it could be a lamp, it could be anything. But this switch was like a really, really crafty but really dangerous thing because you you couldn't see them. Like I could lay one on the ground in front of me, like just drop it and not blink and lose it. They were like micro pressure plates on alternator wire. So they had alternator wire and they'd scratch off the coating in little spaces and then put like surgical tubing over it and glad wrap it on. And they'd be hundreds of these in like...
Geez, they put some effort in these things.
Yeah, there'd be hundreds of these in like a 3-4 meter wide pressure plate. They just snake it down a path like that. So it's like, chances are you're going to step on at least 5 of these in one footstep, right? And one of them would just function whatever the device was. And they were so hard to see because they'd glad wrap it and then coat it into a resin and just roll it in dirt. But it wasn't attached to anything. So you can like literally drop it in front of me in a pile and you wouldn't see it. Yeah, so we actually trained our dogs to find those. So we were lucky enough to have someone recover some of them, and then they had some brought back to Australia so we could imprint our dogs on them so that they could find them out when we were doing searches. And I taught Loki how to do it. It was a nightmare because he's like 110%, like it's 0 or 100. Those are his 2 speeds, and getting him to slow down enough to even just do berries, let alone find something like that was really painful. The dude I actually took over when I got to Iraq. I don't know if I mentioned it was Iraq. The deployment was Iraq. This was in 2018. The dude who I went over to replace trained Loki at his basic course. So it was really cool. I got to take him over and show him where he was at. And he told me he was pretty impressed with where he was at because he obviously knew the dog and how he worked. So that was pretty good. Unfortunately, that trip was meant to be 6 months and it only ended up being like 3 for me because I got injured. A training accident where I had a partial amputation of my right index finger and a couple of other breaks and some burns and stuff like that. That was an interesting one. But I ended up getting sent home after that and had to have some surgery and ended up getting that finger amputated or part of that finger amputated.
9.5 digits.
Yeah, 9.5.
Flynn goes, so I shake it, count up to 9.5. That
it's the highest possible score you'll ever get from me. 9.5. So I got sent home from that, unfortunately. But so like we were talking about before, there was an old preserve. Another mate of mine from that unit went over and replaced me. My dog stayed there for a bit. Yep. So one of my good friends actually had to look after him. He wasn't a dog handler, and he was just like, "What do I feed him? Like Cheetos?" So it was like the dudes. It was a small team of engineers there. There was like other people we were working with, but the engineers that were there was like 5 of us. So they had my dog, and they were just like, "What the fuck do we do with it?" Like, you know what I mean? They had a good time with him. They loved him though. Like, the dogs are like just another one of the boys. And they ended up flying one of the dudes over to look after him in Dubai because that's where we staged out of. They sent him back, and then the other handler flew in and finished the rest of the tour off for me.
Yeah. And Loki stayed?
No, so Loki flew back. He stayed for probably like a month or 2 before they managed to get him back.
Become a pet with the team there.
Yeah. So the requirements, I think it's Department of Agriculture and Water, like import export requirements for getting these dogs is over there and back is really strict. Like we are like, you're giving them doxycycline, I think it is daily, like morning and night. You've got to, I think we have to frontline them still, like every month instead of 3 monthly. They've got to be wormed every month instead of 3 monthly. Like they're like regimented, and you've got to document it all too. You've got to sign it all so that when you come back, your dog can actually get into the country. And then they still have to do quarantine. I think it was 6 months in quarantine.
6 months.
Yeah, I think it was back in the day. I think we ended up managing somehow to get a quarantine facility on base that we had to manage, and like that was a lot more work because then we had to make sure it was clean and up to standard so that we could have the dogs there still, because they'd be in Melbourne for way too long. By the time we got them back, like the training was just shit. You'd be starting from nearly scratch again with this dog that was just running hot on a deployment for so long, and you get it back and it's just this overweight thing that doesn't do anything. Yeah.
But you wouldn't have to train as hard as what you initially did to get it back on the bike.
A lot of it was just conditioning, and then like you get them over a couple of odors and they're like, oh yeah,
I know those things is again, let's get going.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously you have to put time and effort back in them.
Yeah. It was just shit. Like you'd get home and you'd be on holidays and your dog's still stuck in quarantine jail for 6 months, and you get back to your unit after, because you might spend a month on leave after your deployment, you get back and you haven't got a dog, so you're like,
what do I do?
Fuck, this sucks. I want to work a dog, right? He's stuck in quarantine jail down in Melbourne. But it's better now. They've got much better procedures now. I don't think it's 6 months at all. They're pretty lucky.
Beautiful. What is that? Have you got like how do I say it? I don't want to say like a favourite story, but like a favourite find with one of your dogs that you can talk about? Or even a
Maybe
special,
not.
or even a special moment that you had overseas with a dog.
Um,
Doesn't even have to be a find, I suppose.
no, I probably I'd have to think about that now. I got a lot of like. 'Cause I spent obviously I did 3 deployments. One was solely with a dog. One was the one in Iraq was a training mission. So I had a dog there as a force projection, like a force protection element, but I wasn't there to work a dog. I was there to train the Iraqi special forces in engineering, like high research stuff. But I had a dog there in case something happened and we needed to go do something. They could have that element. So that deployment was a lot of, again, me doing training with him to maintain this dog that they wanted in my own time outside of the hours that they wanted us to work with the Iraqi guys. Yeah, and that was a lot of like sourcing areas and stuff by myself. So that one I didn't get to do a whole lot of dog work. There's a lot of stories. Like everyone likes the dogs. So if you're walking around this base with a dog, you get a lot of attention. A lot of people want to come and pat your dogs. My favorite story with dogs ever, it's not really gruesome, but Joe, the first time I ever met Joe on my first deployment when he was with this other handler who ended up adopting him when he retired. And I think it was a bit of a stitch up because back then they were doing on-source delivery. So they were like, go sit on top of that Connex and like have the ball on the side of the Connex. And when we tell you, drop the ball down because the hive was at the bottom of the Connex. This is in summer in Afghanistan. It's like 40 degrees and I'm laying on a metal Connex. And I was there for about 45 minutes because the dog, like he knew the odor was there, but he couldn't pinpoint it. So he was in and out. And this dog had a tail at this point. Shortly afterwards, he didn't. Yeah, because he's a Springer, right? He's just and he was like working so hard for like 40 minutes straight to get to this odor, and he just couldn't pinpoint it for some reason. But he knew it was in the area. He kept running back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and he bashed his tail up that much that it was broken and it never healed. Wow. So like they bandaged it up and they kept like he was there for an operation, so he had to go work, and every time he went out, he'd like break it on something and keep breaking it. So they had to amputate his tail while he was over there. So they amputated his tail, and then he was fine and went back out working. Wow. But I was sitting on top of this Connex with this ball for like 40 minutes. And then finally they got me to drop the ball and I got down and it looked like a murder scene. There was like blood from his broken tail because he was in there working so hard, just his guts out, bashing it on these pallets and then on this Connex. Like it's just a lot of blood. And I was just like, what the hell happened down here? Like I was laying on this Connex for 40 minutes. I come over and there's like all this blood and then the dog's tail getting amputated. But that was my first interaction with Joe. And then about nearly just over a year later, I was working him. I was handling him.
The dog without a tail.
Yeah. He was like, I remember you when you had a tail. But I can see why they had to get rid of it because he was just nuts. Like it was 110% all the time.
So, mate, sacrifice his tail for a ball.
Yeah.
Just goes to show how hard they're working. Like,
talk about drive.
And he didn't give up. Like they were willing to let him work as long as he could. That same dog actually. Another story about this dog. I before that deployment when I was back in Darwin, continuing my training after I got removed from the trip and then brought back on. I had to continue my training. I was working him up in Darwin. He'd been there for a while, so we'd acclimatized, and we were doing a route search. And I think it was like maybe 800 meters. So it wasn't a very long one by their standards. And he probably worked for maybe 16, 17 minutes on this route search. And he was working like fine. No that I could see, noticeable signs. Like he was tired, but he wasn't like as tired as I'm about to tell you he was. He was working. He got to the ball, sat and just stared at it. And I was probably like maybe 100, maybe 80 to 100 meters away. So I had to walk up on source delivery still at that point. He just sat there staring at it. Threw the ball in, he grabbed it, collapsed. His internal temperature was like nearly 42 degrees. He was just working so hard and he got to that odor, just sat there staring at it, finally got his ball and just collapsed.
He would have been even just staring at that thing, waiting for his reward. He would have been burning up in the head too, right?
So we ended up taking him to the vet and had to get like a plasma transfusion and everything for him because he was like, I think the doctor was saying something about like a degree or half a degree more, and he's like multiple organ failure.
Yeah,
just
right.
give it in. And like I was working him, and I'd worked this dog for a while, and like I was watching him because we're watching him work, right? And I was like, no visible signs that this dog was about to go down with like heat stroke essentially. And he just, threw the ball in, got his ball, pretty much grabbed it, turned around, and just went, poof, like fell on the ground. I was just like, shit.
Yeah.
But like, that's the type of dog we've got, like the dogs that are just so into this work, and it's all just for a tennis ball. But you kind of need them to be.
And you're probably seeing a little bit of that now.
Yeah.
Just not on tennis balls, all right?
Yeah. No, it's definitely what I'm seeing. Got a couple of young prospects.
So, you've come home. What was left for you in the army, mate? What did you do after that?
So when was that? That was 2018. So I spent another couple of years in that unit, doing a few different roles. Like I moved out of dogs for a year because I just wanted a bit of a change. I felt like I was getting a bit stagnant there, doing the same sort of thing, especially with like deployments and operations and stuff. Essentially drying up. There was a lot of training and not much actual working of your dog, and I wanted a bit of a change, so I didn't went to go pursue the EOD path like we were talking about before, because I had the qual. There's a couple of different quals you get. You've got an EOD
Qualifications,
an explosive ordnance disposal technician, then you've got an explosive ordnance reconnaissance, which is basically someone who just helps an EOD tech. And there's another qual that was sort of outdated that I had, so I was going to move down that path and try and pursue that, but I realized quickly that it wasn't what I wanted to do. I ended up doing a different role within my troop at that point, in more of a leadership admin role, taking care of my troop. And then I posted into in 2022 the School of Military Engineering as an instructor at the dog cell, where we run the basic dog handler course and the supervisor course, which is essentially like our dog trainers. So the basic dog handler course are engineers that have no background or anything like that. We bring them in. 6 months later, they're a qualified dog handler.
Yep.
To our minimum, our smallest, like our basic standard. And then our supervisors course is where we get senior qualified dog handlers and bring them in, and they train explosive detection dogs from just a dog out to a finished product after 6 months. So that course is run at the start of the year, which I really enjoyed. I liked teaching, and the dudes I had on that course were phenomenal. They were like really eager, and they were really good handlers. So watching them train dogs, and it's being able to see that product, right? You get these dogs who just dogs, like they chase a tennis ball and that's about it. They might sit depending where we get them from.
Yeah.
But then 6 months later, they're like working off lead at distance, like finding all these odors and like doing a whole heap of other things. They like we train them to follow lasers, so you can target specific things. Like with these dogs, if I wanted to send it down an alleyway to a specific door, it's going to search everything on the way, because that's how we train them. Where we train them to follow a laser, where they'll follow it to a point and then they'll search where the laser was, so we can target specific things to expedite. Even though they're very quick, like they're much quicker than a hand searcher, we can expedite the process of getting them to there. If we can get an untargetable route to that door, we don't need to search the whole way to it.
From here on.
Yeah. And it's just a really good way of pinpointing them. If you want them, if they're in a room, and normally we let them go into a room by themselves first, like do a bit of what we call a free head, where they just run around and like you watch what they have and haven't done and trying to watch any changes in their body language, and then you go in and systematic and like hand target things that you think they might have missed. With this, it's just an easier way to do it as well if it's a dark room or a lot of stuff.
You're basically like pointing and like waving your hand around,
from a bit
guiding
of
the dog and going, hey, search over here, over here, over here.
A lot of this, everything we do, we try to do from distance, because obviously like the nature of the job, we want the dogs to be comfortable working away from us, because that's how they're going to be in an operational setting majority of the time. Some of the times you are hand searching stuff if you feel like you're not in a dangerous position, just looking for like a cache, like somebody's hidden a weapon.
Close enough to touch something and lose your arm, right?
Yeah.
Or worse.
Yeah, you're not going to be like hand targeting where you think there might be IEDs. But like if you're searching a rock wall and you think there might be like a cache or a hidden weapon or something, you can do that. But they need to get comfortable working at a distance where they're not right near us, and we need to get them used to being controllable at that distance. You know what I mean? A lot of the stuff we do is like verbal hand signals as well. So we'll cue a hand signal to a verbal, because at distance they might not hear what the verbal command is, but they might hear something and look back, and then we can sort of do body movement or gesture where we want them or what we want them to do.
How about whistles? Did you ever use whistles? No,
we didn't use whistles. We did use a collar that would beep and vibrate, so we could cue commands to those. So we would use one, the vibrate for a silent recall, because if we were doing stuff at night and we were using the dog to search an entrance to a building and we didn't want people to know we were there, we could get the dog, cast the dog in quietly with like a laser or something, and then recall it if it did indicate with no noise, and bring it back and be like, oh, we're not using that entrance or whatever it was. And then we had a vibrate as well for a stay. So if like, say for example, we got into a firefight and my dog was out at distance and it was safe, I could drop it before, because I didn't want to recall it right in the middle of a firefight when shit's going like bad. I could drop it if it was somewhere safe and just keep it there. until I could get to a position or get to it, or it was safe to recall it. And we use the vibrate for that because we feel like the tone for that. The tone for the recall, because it's a bit louder, and if there's shit going on and there's shooting happening,
There's already noise.
Yeah, and it just breaks through, and we want the vibrate for the silent recall.
Yeah.
So you're training dog handlers,
Yep.
right? Or you're creating dog handlers,
Yep.
but they're coming out of a structured kind of mentality.
Yeah.
How do you tone that back? How do you tie that to what we do now?
Well, when you say we now, you mean at Hooked on Hounds?
At Hooked on Hounds, now we're dealing with pet owners that haven't kind of got the structure that you had before. Like how challenging?
I'm struggling.
Yeah, you're doing a good job, mate. No one would pick it.
I had a lot of people, like a lot of my close friends are very honest with me, and they're like, "You're a very abrasive and direct person," and that rubs a lot of people the wrong way. It got me in a lot of trouble in the military. It's not out of malice. If someone asked me to do something, I'm like, "Why am I doing that?" Just because I want to know what the end goal is, and I learned very quickly that that's not the correct way to do things. But yeah, I'm like you highlighted. I'm used to working with a lot of like really motivated,
analytical,
soldiers, right? And you give them a task and they do it, and they're very motivated for it.
High awareness rate, I suppose, is where I'm going as well.
Yeah, and they've got accountability. Like they can get in trouble, like legitimate trouble, if something happens that they were meant to do. And we rely on that a lot. You know what I mean? It's like, I tell you to do this, I shouldn't have to check up on it because you're going to get your ass kicked if you don't do it. So I don't have to check up on you because that'll come.
Yeah.
But
you can't make someone.
I can't yell at a client and be like, "Go fucking do this," because I'm telling you to. It's been a challenge, but at the end of the day, I kind of just like the fact that I'm still working with dogs after leaving the army, because I don't know if I've mentioned it. I ended up leaving December last year, and then Dan and Nat were kind enough to give me a job as their trainee.
Far from it, mate. You're doing really well. Actually, Nat, there was a job here the other week, and Nat goes, "Oh, it was good that you got Shayne to take that over because I think you were a bit too direct, and Shayne done really good with that client." I was just like, I thought I was being nice.
Maybe the first time I've heard that.
No, you're doing a fantastic job.
No, but I'm enjoying it. Like, I'm just happy to be like still working with dogs and like seeing like I said before, the biggest thing I liked about my last year in defense as an instructor was seeing that progression. You know what I mean? Like being able to see this dog week to week just get better and better and better, and the people that you're instructing have all those cogs fall into place and just be like, okay, and you know what I mean?
That's why we're doing that.
That was and that was, I found that really beneficial because I was just like I know all this stuff works. I've trained dogs to do it and I've seen it done before, but just being able to tell someone and see them do it, and it's like the circle's complete. You know what I mean? Like it just felt I'm really fulfilled by it. But yeah, I'm still just happy to be working dogs, and I just have to make sure that I remember I'm not in the military and I'm dealing with people who are paying to be here.
Yeah.
And that I want them to come back.
Mate, you're doing a good job, mate. Like I said, I've made a commitment to you as much as you made a commitment to us, right? And I've been honest and upfront, so you're doing a fantastic job.
Thank you.
And obviously, your own business there in K9 Scent Training.
Mm-hmm.
What was the thought process behind that?
So once I understood that because I was being medically discharged from the military, just too many injuries compiled up, and I wasn't able to effectively do my job anymore to the highest standard. I was like, shit, like what am I going to do? And I knew I wanted to stay with dogs, so I was like, I'd heard about Noseworks and all that sort of stuff, and I'd spoken to a few people like Becky Thomas up in Queensland from Canada Noseworks. And yeah, I was like, there's a market for the skill set that I have. So why not try and take advantage of that? I'll be doing something that I enjoy, and I'll be doing something that I know how to do. That the military spent a lot of time and money into training me to be able to do, and then just went, all right, you're done, off you go. And I was like, okay.
And like as you see here, like at Hooked on Hounds, like there's so many people investing in their dogs, especially like after COVID. It's really like, I think I don't even know what the number is for dog population taking off. And you and I talk about it all the time, genetic fulfillment, right?
Yeah.
So the services you can offer there, they really are growing really quick because
Yeah.
people wanted to get the best out of their dog.
I think a lot of people are sort of trying to move into, like understanding, like we're talking about genetic fulfillment and things that they can do for their dogs that aren't just, taking it to the park and throwing a ball for it. They want some sort of mental stimulation where the dog has to think about what it's doing and get some fulfillment in that. And, scent detection is definitely one of those ones where your dog has to use its brain and it's sniffing all at the same time while it's meant to be breathing. Like, so it's a very challenging thing for a dog to do, especially for long periods of time. They do it really well. But it's one of those things that's like just really beneficial for a dog that, you want to get it using its brain and trying to determine what it's meant to be doing. Like if this is the odor it's looking for, if that's not, like, I really enjoy it. And yeah, like I said, there's a lot of people I feel out there nowadays that are trying to do a lot more things like that, like the herding, all these agility competitions and stuff, where not just taking your dog to the park, throwing a ball for half an hour and saying, yeah, I've done a great job with my dog, you know what I mean? Because you really haven't.
Oh, it's funny. Yeah, you're right. And I remember, it's funny you mentioned herding next. I remember the first time you came out with one of our favorite clients there, and you come as a guest. And I think something happened. I sent a dog out and just turned my back, and we kept talking. And the next minute, the stocker coming back, the sheep would come back for the paddock, and you're like, "So, how did you make him do that?" And I didn't make him. I just asked him to go that particular way. And
so like all of our dogs that we work with, we have to teach them the directions that we want. So we do it through place training and like just reward history. And we end up like giving them directions and commands that they follow, but we have to train that in them because there's no stock for them to herd. I'm like, you get on means go that way until I tell you get across, get over, or get back, or come back.
Very mechanical, right?
Yeah, we train it like that, and they're very robotic in that sense. And then once you take all those place markers away, it's more like steering a tugboat than turning, you know what I mean? Because there's no marks from the go to. So you start using those commands to take them to things that you think will draw their attention to search, or where you might think there could be something for them to search. So that's how we ended up like moving into that. But then when I saw the herding dogs do that and they were just doing it, I was like, yeah, but how? Like, how did you get from this to that? Like, I don't understand. And it literally blew my mind. I was like, wow. And I drew a lot of like similarities in like how it was achieved. But it was still just like blowing my mind that it was just like, you just walk this way and the dog goes that way. And I was like, but why? Why is it doing this? Like, you haven't told it. You haven't taught it. You haven't told it to do why? And I was fascinated. And I enjoyed watching it ever since.
And even get your hands in there and get dirty just about every day now. Even running, doing some of that stuff yourself, right? Like, well, I'm one of these kind of guys that kind of got to learn by jumping in the deep end sometimes. So I'm like, hey, Shayne, start this dog.
Yeah. He goes, this isn't in your job description, but do this. Like I think it was like the second, I hadn't even worked a dog. And Dan was like, here, take this client's dog, get in the yard. And I was just like, okay. Like, I got to pretend like I know what I'm doing here. And it was like it was really good. Like I'd seen Dan do it a couple of times. I'd seen other clients who do it, and I was just like, okay, I'm just going to mirror what they do. And it was just like, it was crazy. Like I was just like, okay, I'm going to walk this way. Dog goes that way. I'm going to go around this way. Dog goes that way. Like,
do you find the principles all the same? Or not at all?
In regards to the herding?
Just in regards to training.
Yeah, like a lot of all the foundations behind, like what we're doing here with and what we're telling the clients on how to train their dogs and how to solve problems, exact same. Like part of the spiel I had with like the scent detection course I wanted to run is like I don't care if I'm training like your pet dog or a military working dog. The foundations for this scent work are all the same. Like it's going to be no different. It's just how far I take it past these foundations will determine where you want this dog to go. Will determine how far I'm going to take it. But the initial imprinting and targeting of a scent tube or whatever it is you're going to have your odor in, and imprinting of that odor is the exact same. Doesn't matter what dog I'm working. It's the building blocks of everything else we're going to go from.
And we keep your training there pretty sharp with one of our own here anyway. So
it
always keeps you on your toes. Become your favourite boy pretty quickly, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. I'm having a good time with him. But I look forward to working him every time. He's just I think I said the other day, I was like, there's so much potential in that dog that like.
You mean for military work or
for operational work?
Yeah. So you're not talking about one of his kelpies. You're talking about one of the shepherds.
Yes. Yeah. Talking about one of the shepherds.
I wasn't sure who you were talking about.
No, like when I got here and started working here, like I saw all of Dan's dogs, and I was just like started doing some stuff just to show them. Like they actually went out on a limb and hired me without ever having seen me work a dog or train a dog. they just went out off like
mate.
word of mouth, and I was
Yeah.
like, okay, that's a bold move.
Yeah.
So I was like, I've got to show you something, right? And I
Yeah.
started training one of their dogs to do some scent work, and I was just like, holy shit, like, this dog is really good. And we'd like I'd try to recruit a couple of dogs, like always looking at dogs and assessing dogs, especially at the school. And like I saw him and started working with him, and I was like this dog could do this job for real. And spoke to Dan and Nat, and I was like I really want to train this dog to do something. Like I feel like he's got so much potential that, you know, it'd be a crime to let that go to waste and not, you know, give him a job where he can do some real good work. So yeah, we're just working along with him, putting along. He's doing really well.
So now we share him.
Yeah. We're taking turns. We share custody.
And how about, like, you mentioned that, like, you do jump in here now and get dogs started, and you're progressing, right? Like, like you come third in your first trial the other day, right? You're progressing. Like, how you found the foundations of starting a stock dog now and working a stock dog, and like you're working dogs of all different stages, right? You work some of my fully trained dogs. You've started dogs that have never seen a sheep before.
Yeah.
How, like, I know that still spins your mind because you've got another living, you're working another living, breathing organism is the reward, right, in the sheep.
Yeah.
So how do you get your head around that, and how?
I feel like there's a lot of it, like, I feel like a lot of it carries over, right? Like I haven't worked a whole lot, like you said, since working here. I've only started working some stock dogs, but I remember watching you work and like piecing together and asking questions why certain things are done. So in my mind, I had like a rough idea, and I would ask you so that I could, like, you know, draw that conclusion and be like, is this why you're doing this, or is this why you're doing this? So I can be like, okay, like I'm piecing all this together, like why you're doing these things and how this is rewarding for the dog, and, you know, how you're building, you know, these behaviors up by what you're doing. A lot of it all of it makes sense to me, and I've just really enjoyed, you know, getting in there and actually doing it, because I'm very similar. Like I have to physically get in and do things to learn. Like I can read.
Visual learner.
Yeah, I'm visual and like physical. Like I have to get in, be doing things and like fuck it up a couple of times, and like, you know what I mean? That's my fingers is an example. To learn. So like watching someone do that and asking questions is fine, but then actually getting in there and being on the ground doing it is where, like, for me, like I get way more than anything else. Like them sitting and watching, like it pieces things together, but it really solidifies it all for me when I'm in there actually doing it. But yeah, I think that answered your question, hopefully.
Yeah.
It did. And what about, like, you're exposed to so many dogs now.
Yeah.
Like with a lot of different behavioral issues. How much are you learning about dogs?
A lot. So I've mentioned this to you before. Like one of the things I was actually really excited about when I started working here was, like, we get access to a lot of dogs in the military, but we're kind of spoilt for choice, where if we get a dog that, it might sound a little bad, but if we get a dog that has some issues, that the time investment isn't going to be worth it in the end, because we could just replace that dog. Yeah, it's a business at the end of the day, right? And they have to produce product. Like there's a capability that's dependent on, you know, product being produced for, you know, essentially at the end of the day, people's like safety. So if we get a dog that where the time investment to fix certain issues isn't worth it, we can just send that dog back and get another one and start from scratch. So I said to Dan and Nat, I was like, I didn't have a whole lot of experience in dealing with dogs with heaps of reactivity issues or lots of behavioral issues. We had a couple here and there, a couple of dogs that didn't get on, but it wasn't like anything like what you might see here. And I said I was really excited to learn and get exposure to that, because I just didn't get that in that job, because it just wasn't something that they were willing to entertain.
Which is fair enough. Like,
yeah, exactly.
The dogs are there protecting your lives at the end of the day.
Yeah, and yeah, it's just a big business defense. Like if it's not worth their time and effort, because they do have timelines. Like it is a timed course. You have to produce dogs by this point for the next year's course, and so on and so forth. And it just keeps rolling over. And there's dogs retiring out of the units and stuff like that. So they've got to keep rolling through and bring the best possible candidates in, so for the most chance of success. Because, you know, you'll get a supervisor that might start with 5 dogs and only pass 1, and there's like maybe 6 supervisors on a course.
A lot of dogs.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of dropouts, and they can fail on really easy things. Like if they're, you know, scared of gunfire, we can do some gunfire exposure. But if they're terrified of it, then
they're terrified of it.
Replace it. And same with helicopters. We had one dog that we had to replace because it wouldn't walk on tile floors, and we had like 6 or 7 different trainers, like do different things and like talk about different things and try and expose it. And it just, like, even for a tennis ball, would chase a tennis ball all day for anything. She was a Kelpie. Actually, when we retired her, I adopted her out to a mate of mine. And still has issues with surfaces like that, but we just couldn't get her through. And it was towards the end of their course before the trainee identified it. And we were like, you don't have the time to work this to get this dog over the line.
Yeah.
He ended up giving that dog to me, and I gave him my dog. As instructors, we take on a dog so that we can, when we're explaining something, we can physically demonstrate it and you can see the troubleshooting. So I just bring out this perfect dog that's already trained, you're not going to learn as much, right? So as the instructors, we would have green dogs that we train in line with the students as when we're there. So we're still getting hands on dogs, still learning and experiencing all because every dog will be different. And then I ended up giving my dog to this trainer. He ended up keeping that and passing it, and that was his dog that he went to his unit with, another Kelpie.
There you go.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm glad you actually just highlighted that. Not that it's a Kelpie, but you guys were actually recruiting dogs for some really reputable rescue groups as well, right? So you're using recycled dogs, and giving them a second chance.
That's really cool for
absolutely
for government organisation to.
So I foster dogs for like a rescue. Am I allowed to name them?
Yeah, why not? Give them a plug.
So it's fetching dogs. I can't remember how I got in contact with them. I think it was through like a mutual friend. And they hit me up a while back to foster some dogs that they thought might be suitable because they knew where I worked. And I've fostered like a couple of dogs now. It's probably over 10 now, I think, with them in the last.
A couple of pretty cool ones too.
Yeah, a couple of them we've ended up getting through. Like I'll take them on, do our assessment, and then take them into work and be like, try this dog, and I'll try it and then buy it.
So you're still involved with them in that process then?
The fostering.
Well, army in getting recruiting dogs then? Is that?
I wouldn't say like deeply involved. Like I still talk to them, and like if I see a dog that I think would be suitable, I let them know because I'm still passionate about the work, and I know the dogs, if it makes it through, it's going to be doing like a really valued job keeping people safe. So 100%. If I find a dog that's suitable, I'll definitely tell them about it, or even try and train one for them to pass on. But I've had a couple of good ones come through that rescue.
How many good ones have we had for him? We're like, whoa, let's get this. We start playing with him. He's like, this dog would be an awesome dog.
I feel like every day I'm like trying to steal one dog off someone.
There's people out here, like there are clients sitting on gold mines of dogs, right? Like,
that's how we used to get some dogs too. There'd be people just ring up and say, oh, this dog's just too high energy. And we'd go out and have a look at it, throw a ball. If it chase it, we'll take it.
Yeah.
Some of the best, one of the best dogs we ever had. His name was Fletch. He was like a brown, in my opinion anyway, one of the best dogs we ever had. He was this really small brown, I think he was like a Cocker Spaniel cross something. But he was tiny. We actually rescued him off the vet's bed. He was about to get green gooed, like literally into the vet, and said, we're taking this dog. Took him, got him trained up, and he was like one of the best dogs we ever produced.
Yeah.
And like got to see work, which was crazy. Like there was a lot of good dogs like that, especially from the vet, like the pounds and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But now, like they've secured like a fairly decent like recruitment
process
partner, where they can get like just access to bulk dogs, where they can, I think one year we brought like 23 dogs in from this organization, a government organization, assessed them all and kept like 17 of them, and then I think out of those 17, like maybe 9 passed.
Yeah, right.
It's pretty high, like considering like they're coming from mum and dad backyards, a lot of these dogs, right? Like, and with too much or barking or digging or carrying on, and they're getting a second lease of life, or at least an opportunity.
Yeah. And does it have to be a ball, or can it be like a tug? Or?
No, so historically it used to be like the dog doesn't chase the ball, it's useless.
Yep.
But now, like it's going to sound really bad, but like up until like a couple of years ago, we weren't even allowed to use clickers. Like it was all compulsion. There's like a really sort of like old school period, especially when I joined. There was a lot of compulsion and like positive punishment stuff. And a couple of years after I joined, sort of there's this big shift. Like a lot of the older trainers who were like, I feel just too afraid to learn new techniques and stuff, they ended up leaving, and some of the newer people coming into those positions were a bit more open-minded and willing to learn, and they really paved this way where everything just shifted. So we can use tennis balls, we can use bumpers, we can use bite pillows, we can use whatever the dog finds valuable. If the dog's going to work for it to the degree that we need it to, fucking use it.
Yeah.
Like if it achieves the end goal, doesn't matter. Like we've probably been so many dogs that would have been amazing simply because they would have rather bite a pillow than chase a tennis ball. And we were like, no, it's useless. It's like such a waste when you think about it. And it's like now they're really good. Like there's a lot of even when I did my basic course, because I instructed on the basic course for last year, and the content that they were delivered was like leaps and bounds beyond what I got taught on mine. Like, and I was just like, you guys don't know how lucky you are. Like the freedom you have with training tools. And, you know, we basically say to them, like, these are all the training methods that we would like you to use. These, like, you can use century, you can use this, you can do whatever you want, like however you want to train, like within this scope. We give them a decent scope, and we're like, challenge you to like train one of your dogs in each way.
Yeah.
So like you might, you know, for your imprinting, you might use centrifuge for one, Herstick wall for the other. You might use something else for this one. Trial them all, because this is like, once you leave here, you've got one dog, and your access to dogs and dogs that need training is going to dwindle. Because when you're in your units, you can't just go grab 6 dogs and train them, because your unit takes on that responsibility and it's all money, right? But here you've got access to essentially an endless supply of dogs and training aids and knowledge from all these other trainers. Trial them out, try everything. Try one dog, try a different thing each time. If it doesn't work, swap to something else. Like,
you have too many tools in the toolbox. Well,
right? Use this 6 months to soak up as much as you can. And it's hard for them because they have to produce a product. So they all just go for whatever they know is the easiest and the most effective, reliable. And it's like, I get that. But like, I'd rather see you, like, I'm less likely to fail you on something if I've seen that you've actually challenged yourself and broadened your horizon to make yourself a better trainer in the long run than just stuck to one thing and that's all you know. If you get a dog that doesn't work on, you're fucked. You know what I mean? Like, this is your chance to grow and learn, take advantage of it. Because like, you've still got one dog you can do the easy stuff on. You only have to pass the one dog to get through the course, right? And it's very intense. Like, there's a lot that goes on, but it's adequate to get through. You know what I mean? Yeah. So really try and give them all the tools, like all the opportunity to learn and try different things, and just experience it, because those opportunities drastically reduce when they go to their unit, because they've got other responsibilities. They don't have access to the training aids or the tools or the dogs or the knowledge that is around them at the school. There's a lot of qualified trainers there, like a lot of knowledgeable trainers there. And I enjoyed that part of my last year in defence the most, because the dudes that we had there really took it on board, and they were like, I was dreading going to that posting. I didn't want to do it. I was like, no, I don't want to leave my unit, because it was fun and I enjoyed it. And I lost that fight. But I got there and I was like, this is probably the best year I've had in the last couple that I can think of in defence. Like, for fulfillment in my job.
There's no way to learn like teaching either, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it was good. It really solidifies a lot of things in your brain when you say it out loud. But yeah, and I like, honestly, that was like probably one of the best years I've ever had in like my 16 years was that last year at the school, like instructing people. And I think it was because of the staff that we had there, the students that were there, and the learning culture that we had. It wasn't like it used to be, where it was like, this is the only way to do things. You know what I mean? Like, do it this way. It's the only way to do it. It was very much like, pick your poison, try everything out. Like, we want you to grow and learn, and like feed us. Like, there were people doing like imprinting dogs and teaching dogs things that I hadn't even tried. And I was like, tell me about it. Like, I want to know what you're experiencing, because I've never done this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that was good. And like, I really enjoyed it.
That's real cool. And you've mentioned there a couple of times, like new, like experiences and whatnot. So we mentioned earlier that you come third at your first sheep trial, right? And here's a guy that's been out working overseas, finding live bombs, right? That's ultimately what you're doing. And then you're at your first 3 sheep trial, and Mr. Cool works out. How are your nerves at your first 3 sheep trial, mate? Like
3 sheep.
First
I'm thinking I was there and I did a different course to a 3 sheep.
he came third, so I'm thinking third. Coming third in your first yard trial, but you looked pretty cool.
So I wasn't like, in my brain, I was like, I was thinking about it, because like, I was like, okay, I want to do really well. I want to impress Dad. I want to beat Nat. But I got out there and like, I was working Trick, your dog, and she's like,
and Nat, in my opinion, Nat had probably the better dog as well.
Oh, really?
Right? she had my favourite, right? But
so I got out there. I wasn't nervous for the work. I was more nervous about like fucking it up. You know what I mean? Like, I was comfortable with working Trick and where I needed to go, but there were definitely moments in there where I think in the final where I was. Oh, there was one where you told me to get off the gate. You like, yelled at me, and you can see in the video. I was just like, like nervously stepping away from the gate,
which I done for everybody.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I was the judge. So yeah, he did win against my partner, who I also judged. And there were no favourites picked. Everyone was judged accordingly, but I helped everyone a bit. But yeah.
We
I just wanted
obviously
to
encouraged.
highlight that.
Yeah.
I didn't help you because you just worked for us.
I think in the trial when the sheep were like, one of them was like sideways up at the drench, I think, and I was just standing there and I was just like bringing Tricky in, getting her out, and she was like breaking the sheep away, and I was just like, fuck, what do I do here?
Yeah.
And like I had that moment where I was like, oh no, I don't know what to do. And I think Dan was like, get the dog over the sheep, push them all away, and then put him back in. I was like, oh, that's so simple. Like that makes perfect sense. But I just like in that moment, I was like, oh fuck. Like, what do I do? This isn't going to plan. So I definitely freaked out a little bit there, but it wasn't like I was freaking out. I was just like, oh shit, I don't know what to do here. Like, I just didn't even conceive the idea of getting her over, even though I knew I had to get her up on the sheep in the drench race to push him up. I was just push him back out and then get him in. I was like,
yeah,
common sense, right? It makes like, in that moment, I just lost it, and I was just like, oh man. This has gone to shit. What do I do?
You looked calm out there.
I was
He
like,
looked very calm, didn't he?
Mum and I even made a comment, like we were sitting up having a drink, and we were like, "That's the calmest we've ever seen Trick." And that was we didn't see the final, but we saw the first round.
Yeah,
and we're like, I don't think I've ever seen that dog that calm.
Well, I think all the points I lost were from my fuck ups. Yeah.
Did you catch a bug?
Did I catch a bug?
Yeah. Did you catch
Addicted?
Oh, yeah. I want to do it again, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I need to get my own dog.
Yeah.
I don't think I can get my Springer Spaniel around it. I had to shoot you. I'll give it a crack.
There's always
we'll joke about this. We'll just tie tennis balls to the back of the wall.
Yeah.
And he'll get them anywhere.
Good old Tom.
Yeah.
So actually, I'm glad you actually did mention Tonk, right? So you've had your a great career there with these Springer Spaniels.
Yeah.
Now you've got your own Springer Spaniel at home, which you have for some time now.
Yep.
You obviously invest a lot of time in him as well.
Yeah, so I got him when I was doing my trainer's course. So he was like a 12-week-old pup running around with a 2-year-old. I had another Springer on that course, 2 Labradors and 2 Kelpie and a Cooley cross, Kelpie, and then a Kelpie Cooley cross. So I had 5 dogs plus this Springer. And I was just like training him at like 12, 13 weeks old, like I was these 2-year-old dogs. And like I was letting him run around. I was doing directionals with him. The only thing I stopped short on was the imprinting. Because he was my dog and I didn't want to imprint him on, live explosives that weren't mine, right?
Could come in handy out there. And
But yeah, I was loving it. I was working him, and he pretty much like, if I wanted to, I reckon, like if I'd have offered him to defense, I could have like put him in there and done the job. He's got the drive for it. He's smart enough to get through it. I prefer dogs that are a little more on the not so sharp side than the smart ones, because I like the dogs that are harder to train in the beginning and then they become easier in the end. I feel like the ones that are really easy to train early on, like the really smart ones, you often develop problems with later because they're too smart and they try to take shortcuts. And the ones that are a little bit on the dull side, they just do what they know and then they just get better at doing what they know. That's my opinion anyway. And I feel like a lot of Springers, at least the ones that I've had, have all been on that sort of like, duller side. But I really enjoy it because they give 110% to everything they do. All you have to do is try and find a way to try and focus that for a split second to get your timing right to go, all the pieces align. And then that's what he does at 110% instead of the other things. But I've spent a lot of work. I've spent a lot of time with him. He's like my sort of mentor dog for all the foster dogs I get because he's extremely social. Like his whole life since he was a pup, he's just been running around with all these other dogs in those kennels. We had like upwards of 35 dogs any time, and I just throw him in a random kennel each day, like a random day run each day with a different dog as a pup, just so he can learn how to be a dog and learn how to interact with the dogs. They can tell him off, and he'd just learn all those things because he was the only dog I had at home, so I needed a way to do that. And now I use him as like my mentor dog for all the foster dogs that I bring in. So he shows them how to behave around the house, and if they are a little reactive, he's like super friendly. He's a bit full on, so some of them will tell him off, but he's quite adept at that now. After a couple of years of being told off, that he gives them their space and they learn to interact. So I like it for that, and he's he's just a cool dog. Like I love him.
How about? I love that, man. I love your bond with him. I love every time you bring him here. I love
Yeah.
him here. Right? Actually, when you don't bring him here, I'm like, oh, where's Tonk?
Yeah. Well, I've got that foster dog at home now, so I leave him there with her because I've only had her for like a week, so
Yeah.
I don't want
Yeah.
her losing her mind in my backyard.
What about expectation, right? You've had all these dogs where you've had to train at a fairly high level because people's lives depended on it. And now you've got this dog, they'd be trained exactly as best the same way, but he's your pet.
I struggle.
Yeah.
So I've struggled a lot. I've made a lot of mistakes with Tonka because I was training him with dogs where I was under the pump to produce a product that was essentially like there to save people's lives. And he bore the brunt of a lot of that when he was only my pet, and I was like expecting him to do these things that these other dogs were doing that were much older than him anyway, and more capable mentally of doing these things. Because I struggled to switch between I'm training an explosive detection dog and I'm just training my pet for fun because I kept training them all at the same time and together.
The same way.
And yeah, I made a lot of mistakes with him. Like he's a very happy-go-lucky dog, but it doesn't take much for him to like if I just pointed him because I roused him a couple of times or been really frustrating day. And he's a quite in touch dog. So like if I'm like angry, he'll just go sit in the corner because he's like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. But it's mainly because he bore I expected a lot more of him than I ever should have, and I treated him like a much older dog.
Yep.
And the standards I would expect from the dogs that I was training, I put on him as a pup and through his adolescence. And I'm a lot easier on him now because like I've obviously realized that after the fact, but you can still see it like in him today. Like he's learnt some of those behaviors, but we're constantly trying to work on those. But I think he does all right. He's a pretty happy-go-lucky dog. Typical Springer gives everything 110%. Yeah.
You're an awesome dog, mate.
Yeah, no, he's wicked.
You're an awesome dog. Mate, we might start wrapping things up because you have got your young fella here who goes home and you've got a pretty big day tomorrow.
I do.
But Laura's not going to let you get away that easy.
One last question as always.
Yep.
Would you rather fight one duck the size of a horse or 20 horses the size of ducks?
20 horses the size of ducks.
Why?
Actually, well, yeah, because I've seen mighty ducks and I understand how vicious ducks can be. So I don't want to fight a duck at its regular size, let alone a horse size.
You don't want a flying V.
No.
Yeah.
I'd rather 20 horses that I could probably, I don't know, corral.
Well answered, mate. Thank you very much for your time.
No, it's my pleasure.
Really much, we really appreciate it. And hope you really enjoy your day tomorrow with some of your old mates there. To everyone listening back, thank you for listening. And please remember, we learn every day, and the day we stop learning from each other will be a sad day. Thank you.